Don't make a sound, Yolanda whispered, pulling me by the wrist toward the coat closet off the front hallway. Please, Mrs. Alderton, I know how this looks, but you have to trust me. I was 63 years old, standing in my good wool coat with my purse on my arm, ready to leave for my daughter's rehearsal dinner, and our housekeeper of 11 years was trying to shove me into a closet. Yolanda, please. Something in her voice stopped me. Not the word, the way she said it, like she already knew what I was about to lose. I stepped in. She pulled the door almost closed behind us, leaving just a thin blade of light from the hallway. We stood there in the dark among the winter coats and old umbrellas, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I could smell my late husband's jacket still hanging in there. Cedar and something faintly like him. 3 years gone, and that jacket still smelled like him. Then I heard the front door open. My daughter's voice first, laughing. That bright, easy laugh she'd had since she was a little girl. Then his voice. My future son-in-law. Steady, measured, the kind of voice that always sounded like it was just about to make a very reasonable point. She's not here, my daughter said. Her car's gone. She must have left already. Good. His voice dropped, not angry. Quieter, the way you get quiet when you want to make sure no one hears. I need you to talk to her tonight, before we get to the restaurant. Talk to her about what? A pause. The house. I stopped breathing. Trev. My daughter's voice shifted. We've been through this. I know, but listen, if we put the offer in before the end of the month, we get in under the new mortgage stress test rules. The rates are already climbing. If we wait. She's not ready to sell. She's 63, and she's alone in a 4-bedroom house in Oakville. That's not sustainable. You know that. I know that. She knows that. Silence from my daughter. I'm not saying pressure her, he said, and his voice went smooth in a way that made my stomach turn over. I'm saying remind her, gently. Tonight, when everyone's happy and she's had a glass of wine, it's the right time. More silence. Then my daughter said very quietly, okay. Just that. Okay. I stood in the coat closet and looked at the strip of light under the door and felt something inside me go very still. Yolanda's hand found mine in the dark. She didn't squeeze it, just held it, like she wanted me to know I wasn't alone in there. My daughter's name is Simone. She is 31 years old, and she has my mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she has been, for most of her life, the thing I was most proud of in the world. I raised her here in this house, the 4-bedroom house in Oakville that apparently is not sustainable. Her father, my husband Remy, died 3 winters ago of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in February, shoveling the front walk before the city plowing came through. He was 61. He was wearing his old Canadian's toque, and his breath would have been making clouds in the air, and he would have been listening to the radio through his earbuds, the way he always did on weekday mornings. That's what I tell myself, that he wasn't frightened, that it was fast. The house is paid off. Remy made sure of that before he died, the way he made sure of most things, quietly, carefully, without making a fuss. He was an engineer. He believed in structures. He believed that if you built things properly from the start, they would hold. I met Trevor 8 months after Remy died. Simone brought him home for Thanksgiving, and he shook my hand firmly and said he'd heard so much about me, and I thought he seemed fine. Not what I would have chosen, but fine. He was in real estate finance. He knew a lot about the market. He talked about it often, the market, the way other men talk about hockey or politics, with a certainty that made me feel slightly stupid for not already knowing what he knew. He was 34. He had a condo in Mississauga that he was waiting to sell at the right time. He drove a leased BMW. He was, I told myself, just a type. A very specific Toronto-adjacent type that I didn't personally find warm, but that Simone seemed to love. And who was I to say what kind of person your daughter should love? I said nothing. For 2 years I said nothing. Yolanda had worked for us since Simone was in university. She came 3 days a week, and after Raimi died, she started coming 4. Not because there was more to clean, but because I think she understood that a quiet house is a different kind of quiet when you're the only one in it. She never said that out loud. She just came. She had watched Trevor across those 2 years the way I had, quietly. The week before the rehearsal dinner, she asked if she could speak with me. We sat at the kitchen table with tea, and she told me what she had overheard 3 months earlier during a Sunday dinner when she was in the next room putting away dishes. Trevor on the phone, not a short call, a long one. He'd been talking about the house, not to Simone, to someone else, a colleague from the sounds of it. He'd been describing the property, the lot size, the proximity to the GO train, the fact that Oakville lakeside detached homes in that price range were moving fast. He'd used the phrase estate asset twice. He'd also said, and Yolanda repeated this to me slowly, making sure she got it exactly right, once we're married, she'll have to listen to Simone, and Simone will listen to me. I put down my teacup. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. She looked at her hands. I wasn't sure, she said. I didn't want to be wrong about him. I didn't want to cause trouble before the wedding if I was wrong. She looked up. But then I heard him on the phone again last week. Same kind of conversation. He mentioned the Dieppe Street property coming up for sale nearby. He said your house would be a better investment than that one if they could get it at the right number. I sat there for a long moment. He was talking about my house, I said, like he already owned it. She nodded. Before they're even married. Yes, she said, I know. I didn't know what to do with that. I went back and forth for the rest of the week. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Yolanda had misunderstood. Trevor was in real estate finance. Maybe this was just how people in that world talked, clinically, about everything. Maybe it meant nothing. I told myself that right up until I was standing in my coat in the front hallway, ready to leave for the rehearsal dinner, and Yolanda grabbed my wrist. They left after a few minutes. Simone called up the stairs. Mom, are you up there? And then, hearing nothing, they assumed I'd already gone and they left. I heard the door close. I heard Trevor's BMW back out of the driveway. Yolanda and I stood in the coat closet for a few seconds longer. Then she opened the door and we stepped out into the hallway and stood there in the ordinary light of the house, and I felt 100 years old. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. And that was true, but I knew one thing very clearly. Standing there, I was not going to have a glass of wine at the rehearsal dinner and let my daughter tell me, gently, that it might be time to think about selling. I was not going to be managed. I've known my daughter for 31 years. I know the difference between Simone when she's excited and Simone when she's performing excitement. I know the difference between her real laugh and her social laugh. I know the particular way she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's uncomfortable. She tucked her hair behind her ear 6 times during the toast. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Burlington, the kind with Edison bulbs and a charcuterie board and a long communal table that makes everyone feel like they're in a magazine. Trevor's parents were there, his father a retired developer from Barrie, his mother pleasant and vague in the way of people who have always had someone else handle the details. Simone's friends, my sister Cora, who had driven in from Kingston and who squeezed my hand under the table and leaned in and said, "You look like you're thinking very hard about something." "Always," I said. Simone came to me near the end of the evening. She'd had 2 glasses of wine, she was glowing the way you glow when you're about to get married, and the night is almost over and everything is still possible. "Can we talk for a second?" she said. "Just us?" We stepped out to the little courtyard behind the restaurant. It was October. The air was cold and damp and smelled like wet leaves. She was wearing a cream blazer and she hugged herself against the chill. "I don't know how to say this," she started. "About the house," I said. She stopped, her face changed. "How did you—" "Tell me what he told you to say to me." She was quiet for a moment. Then he didn't tell me to say anything. "Simone." Another silence, a longer one. "He just thinks it might be a good time to talk about your options," she said. and I recognized the words immediately. His words. I knew they were his because Simone had never in her life called what I did in my own home my options. The market is. I don't want to talk about the market. I kept my voice even. I want to know if this is something you actually believe, that I should sell my home, that it's not sustainable. She blinked. Did he say that to you? Is that what you believe, Simone? Not what Trevor believes, what you believe. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked out toward the parking lot for a moment, and I watched her face do something complicated. I just want you to be okay, she said finally, quietly. After Dad, I worry. And I believed her. That part I believed completely. The worry was real, but the word choices, the timing, the whine, the gently, those weren't hers. I am okay, I said. I am very okay, and I am not selling my house. She nodded, not quite looking at me. Okay, Mom. Look at me. She did. I love you, I said, and I need you to think very carefully before tomorrow about who is asking you to do things and why. I went back inside. I finished my tea. I smiled at Trevor's parents and told his father the renovation he'd mentioned sounded beautiful. I hugged my daughter at the end of the night and held on a beat longer than usual, and felt her hold on too. On the way home, Cora drove and I looked out the window at the orange highway lights blurring past and I tried to figure out what to do. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom that still had Rainy's side of the closet the way he'd left it, because I hadn't been able to bring myself to clear it, and I thought about what Trevor had said. Once we're married, she'll have to listen to Simone, and Simone will listen to me. The calculation of it, the patience of it. 2 years of Sunday dinners and firm handshakes and very reasonable points about the market, and all of it in service of this, my house, Remy's house, the thing we built and paid off and held. I thought about my daughter saying okay in the front hallway, not knowing I was in the closet. She hadn't sounded thrilled. She hadn't sounded like a woman who was excited to have this conversation. She sounded like someone who had been worn down slowly over a long time until agreeing felt easier than pushing back. I knew that sound. I had heard it in myself, years before Remy, in a different life. I got up at 6 in the morning. I made coffee and I called my sister. I need a lawyer, I said. For what? I need to understand what my rights are regarding the house. If she marries him? Cora was quiet for a moment. Tell me everything. I did. All of it. The phone call Yolanda overheard, the coat closet, the rehearsal dinner, the tucked hair, the word options. Cora listened without interrupting, which is not her natural mode, which meant she understood this was serious. You're not being paranoid, she said when I finished. I know I'm not. What do you want to do? Here is what I knew. I did not want to blow up my daughter's wedding. I did not want to stand up in a venue and make a scene and give everyone something to talk about for the next decade. I did not want to be the mother-in-law from hell. I did not want to be wrong. But I also knew this. If I said nothing, if I smiled and went along and handed Trevor the thing he was positioning himself to take, I would spend the rest of my life watching my daughter in a marriage where the power only moved in one direction. I need to talk to Simone, I said, alone, before the ceremony. How alone? No Trevor, no venue coordinator, no brunch mimosas, just us. Cora said, I'll help you make that happen. The wedding was at 4 in the afternoon at a heritage property outside of town, one of those old Ontario farmhouses with a big restored barn. The ceremony was outside, under the old maples. The caterers were from a place in Hamilton. The whole thing had cost, I knew, more than Trevor had contributed to. I hissed, paid for most of it. I sat with that knowledge in the car on the way there. Cora was driving again. She'd arranged, with a cheerful efficiency that I will always be grateful for, to bring Simone's bridal party flowers at the farmhouse. She'd told everyone I'd pick up the bouquets because the florist was on my way, which was true. It got me to the bridal suite an hour before the ceremony, while Trevor was across the property with his groomsmen. Simone opened the door in her robe, hair half up, makeup almost done. She looked beautiful. She also looked, immediately, like she knew something was coming. "Mom," not alarmed, just prepared. "I need 15 minutes, I said, "just you and me." Her maid of honor, a lovely young woman named Bex, who has been Simone's best friend since grade 11, looked between us and said, "I'll just go check on the flowers," and left without being asked. I sat down across from my daughter at the small vanity table, and I looked at her in the mirror for a moment before I said anything. "I was in the coat closet," I said, "yesterday, when you and Trevor came back to the house before the rehearsal dinner." I heard the conversation. Her face in the mirror. "About the house," I said. "Once we're married, she'll have to listen to Simone, and Simone will listen to me." She didn't say anything, but she put down the mascara wand. "I'm not here to blow up your wedding," I said. "I want you to know that first. I'm not here to make a scene or tell you he's a monster or ask you not to go out there. That's your choice. It was always your choice." "Mom?" "Let me finish." She closed her mouth. "I'm here because I watched something happen to you over the last 2 years and I said nothing because I told myself it was none of my business and I didn't want to push you away. And I was wrong." My voice was steadier than I expected. "The way he talks about you, Simone, like you're a conduit. Like your job in this marriage is to be the person who delivers his decisions to me in a softer voice. That is not a partnership." Silence. "Last night at the dinner," I said, "when you came to talk to me outside, did you want to have that conversation? Did you actually think it was the right time?" She looked at the mirror for a long moment. "No," she said at last, very quietly, "I didn't." "Who chose the timing?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "The house is mine," I said. "Your father and I built that. It is not an asset in a portfolio. It is not an investment opportunity. It will go to you when I'm gone, if you want it, and until then it belongs to me, and that is not up for discussion at a dinner table with a glass of wine." I reached over and took her hand. But none of that is actually the point. The point is whether you are marrying a man who sees you as a person or as a useful instrument. My daughter looked at me then, not at my reflection, at me, and I saw something cross her face that looked like recognition. "He loves me," she said. "I know you believe that." "He does." "Maybe he does," I said. "I can't know what's inside him. But I know what I heard, and I know what I've watched, and I know my daughter, and the Simone I raised does not say okay when she means something else." She was quiet for a long time. Outside I could hear the venue coordinator's voice somewhere in the distance, the low murmur of arriving guests. "I've been doing that a lot lately," she said. "Finally." "I know. It's just easier." "I know that too," I said. "It was easier for me once, too, for a little while, before I met your father, and then I met someone who never once asked me to be easier, and I understood the difference." She looked down at her hands. Her engagement ring caught the light. "I don't know what to do," she said. "You don't have to know right now," I said. "You have 15 minutes and a ceremony in an hour and a room full of people who love you. Whatever you decide, to go out there, to not go out there, I will be standing next to you. That hasn't changed." I stood up. I set the flowers on the table beside her. "But I needed you to know what I heard," I said, "because you deserve to know. You deserve someone who told you instead of saying nothing." I went and stood by the window. I looked out at the old maples and the white chairs being arranged in rows and the caterers moving back and forth, and I waited. She went through with the ceremony. I won't pretend that the moment wasn't hard for me, watching her walk out there. But she had made her choice with full information, and that was what I'd wanted. Not to choose for her, just to make sure she was choosing. What I didn't expect was what happened afterward. 3 weeks later, she called me on a Sunday morning. Trevor was playing golf in Collingwood with clients. She came over to the house in Oakville, the not sustainable one, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we used to when she was in high school, with tea and the radio on low. "I've been talking to someone," she said. "A counselor." "Good," I said. I started the week after the wedding. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I kept thinking about what you said. About saying okay when I meant something else." She looked up. "I didn't realize how long I'd been doing it." We talked for 3 hours that Sunday, about Rami, about Trevor, about the specific quiet way that control can arrive in a relationship. Not loud, not sudden, just the steady pressure of a reasonable voice that always seems to know better, until one day you notice you've stopped saying what you actually think. She didn't leave him that day. That wasn't the point of the conversation. But something had shifted. She'd begun to see the shape of it, which is the thing that has to happen first. I will not pretend I know how the story ends. I don't. Marriage is long and people change, and I am 63 and I have been wrong about things before. But I know this. My daughter came back to the house on a Sunday and sat at the table and said what she actually thought, and I sat across from her and said what I actually thought, and that hadn't happened in 2 years. That was the thing I'd been missing without knowing I was missing it. After she left, I stood in the hallway for a while. The afternoon light was coming through the front window the way it always does in October, low and golden, pooling on the floor. The coat closet was right there. The old cedar smell of it. I opened it. I found Remy's jacket. I held it for a moment, that faint trace of him still in the wool. Then I hung it back up carefully and went to call Yolanda to thank her properly for what she'd done. She answered on the second ring. "I just wanted you to know," I said, "that I think everything is going to be all right." She said, "I know, I could tell." I don't know how she could tell, but I believed her. I keep coming back to that coat closet, the dark of it, the smell of Remy's jacket, the thin line of light under the door. I didn't go in there planning to change anything. I went in because Yolanda asked me to, and something in her voice told me I should listen. That's all it was. One small act of paying attention in a moment when it would have been so much easier to walk out the front door and pretend everything was fine. I think about that a lot now. How much of what goes wrong in our lives happens because we chose easy over honest. Not out of cruelty, just out of exhaustion, out of not wanting to be the difficult one. I had been doing that with Trevor for 2 years, smiling at Sunday dinners, telling myself his way of talking was just a type, just how people in his world spoke. I was wrong to stay quiet that long, and I knew it even while I was doing it. But knowing something and doing something about it are not the same thing, and I had let the distance between those two grow wider than it should have. What Yolanda did took a different kind of courage. She wasn't family. She had nothing to gain, and quite a lot to lose by pulling me into that closet. She did it anyway, because she understood that silence in that situation was its own kind of harm. That is not a small thing. It is, I think, one of the most decent things anyone has ever done for me. Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic intervention, just a quiet decision to tell the truth when telling the truth was inconvenient and risky and uncertain. And what Simone did, sitting across from me in that bridal suite, really listening, letting herself hear something difficult on the morning of her own wedding, that took something too. It would have been so easy to shut down, to defend him, to tell me I was wrong and walk out the door and go marry someone while still holding the version of him she needed him to be. She didn't do that. She sat with it. She let it land. That is not weakness. That is one of the harder things a person can do. I have been thinking, since then, about what it actually takes to get things right in this life. Not to be perfect. I am long past believing in perfect. But to get it roughly right, to not look back with too much regret. I think it takes knowing what you actually believe and being willing to say it, even when it costs you something. I think it takes being honest enough with yourself to notice when you've been saying okay when you mean something else, and brave enough to stop. And I think it takes the willingness to stay in a hard conversation instead of leaving it, to keep showing up even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. I don't know what the future holds for Simone. I don't know how her marriage will unfold, or what choices she'll make, or what she'll need from me in the years ahead. I can't know that. But on a Sunday in October, she came back to the house and sat at the kitchen table and said what she actually thought, and I was there to hear it. That is enough for now. That is more than enough. Don't open that door, my daughter's fiancé said to his friend on the phone. He didn't know I was standing on the other side of it. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to hear any of it. But I did. And what I heard in those 90 seconds changed everything. For my daughter, for our family, and for me. Let me go back to the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 63 years old, I live in Burlington, Ontario, and 3 weeks ago, I was the happiest I'd been in years. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's who she is to me, in every way that counts, was getting married. Her name is Claire. She's 31, a registered nurse at Joseph Brant Hospital, and she has the kind of laugh that makes strangers in coffee shops turn around and smile. After a brutal divorce 4 years ago that left her with nothing but a leased Honda and a box of dishes, she had rebuilt herself from scratch. I watched her do it. I watched her cry on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning and then get up the next day and go to work. I watched her stop crying. I watched her stop laughing again. When she called me last November to say she'd met someone, I cried on my own kitchen floor. Happy tears this time. His name was Derek. Derek Charles. He was 42, originally from Halifax, working in commercial real estate in the GTA. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who always knew which wine to order and held doors open without making a production of it. Claire brought him to Thanksgiving dinner and he helped me clear the table without being asked. He remembered that my late husband had been a hockey fan and asked me about him, genuinely, not just to make an impression. I liked him. I want to be honest about that because it makes everything harder to say. They got engaged in February. She called me from the restaurant, whispering into the phone because he'd stepped away to take a call, and she said, "Mom, he asked me. He actually asked me." I could hear her trying not to cry. I was already crying. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June. Small ceremony, Niagara-on-the-Lake, about 60 guests. Dinner at a vineyard after. Claire handled most of it herself. The venue, the flowers, the caterer. She's organized like that. Derek said he'd take care of the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon. He was flying them to Portugal, he said. 2 weeks. She'd never been to Europe. I drove down to Burlington 3 days before the wedding to help with last-minute things. Pressing her dress, assembling centerpieces, that sort of thing. Derek had his own place in Oakville, but he'd been staying at Claire's apartment most of the week. They were planning to look for a house together after the honeymoon. Claire had already started a folder on her phone with listings in Waterdown. Everything was exactly as it should be. The night before the wedding, Derek went to meet some friends for a send-off dinner. Claire and I stayed in with a bottle of Riesling and old photographs. We laughed about her prom dress. We talked about her father, how he would have loved Derek, how he would have made too many speeches and embarrassed her completely. She fell asleep on the couch around 11 with her head on my shoulder, and I sat there in the dark with the lamp on low and felt something so full it almost hurt. I went to bed just after midnight. I woke up at 6:15 because I'm 63 and that's simply what happens now. Claire was still asleep. The apartment was quiet. I put on the kettle, fed her cat, and decided to bring in the dry cleaning from the hall closet. Her dress had been hanging there in its bag since Tuesday, and I wanted to move it to the bedroom where it would be easier to reach. The closet is just off the front hallway, next to the small room Claire uses as an office. The office door was closed. I thought nothing of it. I opened the closet, took the dress bag off the hook, and that's when I heard his voice. Derek was in the office. He must have come back late and I'd slept through it. He was on the phone speaking quietly, but the walls in Claire's apartment are not thick, and the hallway was completely silent. She doesn't know anything, he said. I told you, it's handled. I stood very still. The account in her name is separate. She won't see it until after. By then we'll be in Lisbon and it won't matter. I stopped breathing. Relax. She trusts me completely. That's the whole point. I heard him laugh. A short, flat sound, nothing like the laugh I'd heard at the dinner table, nothing like the laugh he used when Claire was in the room. Then, tell Sandra I said hi, and tell her the transfer goes through on Monday. Sandra. He hung up. I heard him set the phone down on the desk. I didn't move. I stood in that hallway in my housecoat, holding my daughter's wedding dress, and I did not move for what felt like a very long time. Then I walked back to the kitchen, set the dress over a chair, and stood at the counter staring at the kettle until it clicked off. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From that particular kind of cold that comes when something you hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly what you feared. I knew I needed to be careful. I'd heard 30 seconds of a phone call. That was all. There could be explanations. There could be context I was missing. I told myself this as I poured the water over the tea bag. I told myself this very firmly, but the account in her name. And she won't see it until after. I needed to know more before I said a word to Claire. Derek came out of the office around 7, freshly dressed, completely at ease. He kissed the top of my head and asked if there was enough water in the kettle for a second cup. I said yes. I smiled. I asked him if he'd slept well. He said he had. I watched his face while he answered, and I thought, I am 63 years old and I have known liars, and I know what ease looks like when it's performed rather than felt. His was performed. I just hadn't seen it before because I hadn't been looking. He left to pick up his suit from a dry cleaner in Oakville. He'd be back by 10, he said, so they could leave for Niagara by 11. The moment the door closed behind him, I sat down at Claire's kitchen table and I thought very carefully about what I had and what I didn't have. What I had, 30 seconds of a phone call, an account in Claire's name, a transfer on Monday, a woman named Sandra. What I didn't have any idea what it meant. I went to the office. I know that some people would say I had no right to do that, but she is my daughter, and it was her wedding day, and I had heard what I had heard. So I went in. The desk was tidy. His laptop was closed. There was nothing obviously out of place except for a yellow notepad with some figures written on it. Numbers, a few letter combinations that looked like account codes, and a name at the top of the page. Not Sandra. The name at the top of the page. Not Sandra. The name at the top was Melissa Charles. Charles. His last name. I took a photo of the notepad with my phone. Then I left the room exactly as I'd found it and went to sit with my tea. Melissa Charles. I typed it into my browser. It took 4 minutes. She was real. She had a Facebook profile, limited visibility, but enough. Profile photo of a woman in her late 30s standing in front of what looked like a backyard deck, holding a toddler. Location listed as Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I clicked on her profile photo to look at it more closely. In the background of the image, slightly out of focus, there was a man, tall, standing at a barbecue with his back mostly turned. I knew the shape of his shoulders. I sat there for a very long time. Then I called my son-in-law's sister because she works in family law in Toronto, and she is the only person I know who could help me understand what I was looking at without panicking or asking me 17 questions I couldn't answer. I told her what I'd heard. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very calmly, the way she always speaks, "Okay, what's the name again?" She called me back in 40 minutes. Derek Charles had been married to Melissa Ann Charles, née Fitzgerald, since 2019. They had 1 child, née Fitzgerald, since 2019. There had been no divorce filed in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, or Ontario. He was still married. Claire was downstairs in the shower. I could hear the water running. She was probably humming. She hummed in the shower on good mornings, and this was supposed to be the best morning of her life. I sat down on the bed and I held my phone and I thought about what it would do to her to hear this right now, 60 minutes before she was supposed to start her hair and makeup. I thought about the 4 years she'd spent rebuilding. I thought about Portugal. I thought about the account in her name and what Monday might mean. And I thought, she needs to know before this goes any further. She needs to know now, before she signs a single piece of paper, because whatever he was planning, whatever Sandra and the transfer and the account were about, it was built on the assumption that the wedding would happen, that Claire would become his legal partner, and whatever came with that, I had to tell her. But I also knew my daughter. I knew that if I walked in there and said, I heard 30 seconds of a phone call and I found a Facebook photo, she would look at me with that particular expression she has, careful, patient, a little heartbroken, and she would say, Mom, it's my wedding day. She would not be cruel about it. She would just not believe me, not without something harder than what I had. So I called my son-in-law's sister back and I told her what I needed. She said she could have a certified record of his marriage in Nova Scotia pulled within the hour. She had a contact. It would be a PDF on my phone. That would be enough. 45 minutes. I went back downstairs. Claire came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her hair up, looking the way she always looks first thing in the morning. Young and a little soft around the edges, the way people do before they fully put themselves together. She saw my face. Mom, what's wrong? Nothing, I said. I'm just emotional. You know how I am. She hugged me. She smelled like her shampoo, the cedar one she's used since university. I held on a little longer than usual and she laughed and said, Mom, seriously, you're going to make me cry and I haven't even done my mascara yet. I laughed. I went to make her breakfast. Derek came back at 10:15. He was cheerful, easy, carrying his suit in its dry cleaning bag over one shoulder. He kissed Claire on the cheek and asked if she'd eaten. She said she had. He poured himself a coffee and leaned against the counter, talking about the drive down to Niagara, traffic on the QEW, whether they should leave by 11 or wait until 11:30. I watched him. He never once looked uncomfortable, not for a single second. My phone buzzed at 10:47. I excused myself to the bathroom. I opened the PDF. Province of Nova Scotia, vital statistics, certificate of marriage, Derek William Charles and Melissa Ann Fitzgerald. Date of marriage, September 14, 2019. No record of dissolution. I stood in my daughter's bathroom and looked at that document for a long time. I thought about who I wanted to be in this moment. Not the mother who explodes. Not the mother who falls apart. The mother who does what needs to be done. I forwarded the PDF to my own email so I'd have a second copy. Then I went back into the kitchen. Derek, I said, can I talk to you for a minute? Just us, out on the balcony. Claire looked up from her phone. Something in my voice, maybe. Derek looked at me and something shifted behind his eyes. Just briefly, just a flicker. And then the ease came back, smooth and practiced. Of course, he said. We went out onto the balcony. Claire's apartment overlooks a small park. It was a beautiful morning. I remember thinking that, very specifically, it was a genuinely beautiful morning. I handed him my phone with the PDF open. He looked at it. I watched the ease leave his face, slowly, like water draining. What replaced it was not guilt. It was calculation. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. He did not look ashamed. He looked like a man trying to decide which version of the story was still available to him. This isn't what you think, he said. I think it's a marriage certificate with your name on it, I said. What part of that am I misreading? Melissa and I have been separated for 2 years. We just haven't filed yet. It's complicated. There's a child involved. You're not divorced, I said. That means you cannot legally marry my daughter today. That means whatever you were planning to do with an account in her name and a transfer on Monday, you were planning to do while she was your wife in name only, while you were already someone else's husband. I paused. I think you should leave. He looked at me for a long moment. You're going to devastate her, he said. And I looked at him and I said, very quietly, You already did that. I'm just the one who's going to make sure she finds out before it costs her everything." He left. He took his suit, his laptop bag, the keys to his rental car. He didn't say goodbye to Claire. He was gone in 4 minutes. I went back inside. Claire was sitting on the couch. She'd heard the door. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since the night she called me from outside the lawyer's office after her last divorce was finalized. Not crying, not angry, just very still, braced. "Mom," she said. "Come here," I said. I sat down next to her. I took her hands. I told her everything. What I'd heard, what I'd found, what the document said. I told her about Sandra and the transfer. I told her I didn't have all the answers, that there were still things we didn't understand, but that we knew enough. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The account." "Yes." "He asked me to open a joint account 2 months ago. I said I'd think about it. I never did it." I closed my eyes for just a second. "You never did it," I said. "I kept meaning to. I just kept putting it off." She made a short, strange sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "I procrastinate on everything." He used to tease me about it. We sat there together on her couch on what was supposed to be her wedding morning, and I held her hands, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said, "Portugal was probably not real either, was it?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe he intended it. Maybe it was part of how he needed it to look." "I wanted to see Lisbon," she said, very quietly. "I know." She cried then. Not the way she cried after the divorce. That had been a hollowed-out kind of crying, exhausted and without end. This was different. This was sharp and fast, a few minutes of it, and then she sat up straight and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "We need to call the venue," she said. "Yes, and the caterer. And I need to text people before they start driving to Niagara. I'll help you." She looked at me. "How did you know to look? What made you go to the office?" I thought about how to answer that. "I was just awake," I said. "I was just there." She nodded slowly. "Dad would have said that was you looking out for me." I felt my throat tighten. "Yes," I said. "He would have said exactly that. We made the calls." The venue coordinator was kind. She'd had cancellations before, she said. She understood. She was sorry. The caterer was professional. The florist offered to hold the flowers for another booking and didn't ask questions. Claire sent a group message to the guests that said only, "The wedding is not happening today. I'll explain when I can. Thank you for your love and support." Within 10 minutes, she had 43 replies. Nobody asked why. They just said they were there. She forwarded the PDF and my phone call record to a lawyer she knew from the hospital, a patient's family member she'd stayed in touch with over the years. He was going to look at the financial angle, the account Derek had referenced, whether there was any exposure for her. There wasn't. She'd never signed anything. Over the following 2 weeks, things came out slowly, the way these things do. Derek had a pattern. Not a long one. He'd only been married to Melissa for 6 years, but a pattern nonetheless. There were 2 other women he'd had long relationships with, both of whom had eventually discovered Melissa's existence. One of them had opened a joint account. She'd lost just under $8,000 before she understood what had happened. The second had not opened the account, but had co-signed a line of credit. She was still dealing with the fallout. Claire was the third. She was also, as far as anyone could determine, the first he'd actually tried to marry, whether because he'd grown bolder, or because the financial situation had changed, or because he'd simply decided it was time. Nobody knew. His lawyer in Halifax sent a letter to Claire's lawyer saying his client had no further contact with Ms. Sutton and wished her well. That was all. Melissa Chalice, when contacted through proper channels, said she had suspected something was wrong for over a year. She had a child and a mortgage and had been trying to find the right moment to deal with it. She was not a villain in this story. She was another person he'd maneuvered around quietly and carefully for years. Claire sent her a brief, kind message through a mutual contact. Melissa sent one back. I don't know what they said to each other. I didn't ask. It's August now. Claire is fine. I say that not the way people say it when they mean they hope someone is fine, or they're pretending someone is fine. She is actually genuinely fine. She went back to work the following Tuesday. She started running in the mornings, a habit she dropped during the engagement because Derek liked late breakfasts. She's been talking about taking a week off in the fall and going somewhere. Maybe the East Coast, she said. Maybe Cape Breton. She's never been. I drive down to Burlington most Sundays now. We have dinner. We watch something on television. Sometimes we talk about Derek and sometimes we don't. She doesn't say she wasted a year. She says she learned what she could recognize and what she couldn't, and now she knows better. I don't know if I believe that grief is ever that clean. But I believe she means it, and I believe she'll get there. A few weeks ago, she asked me what I would have done if I hadn't woken up early that morning, if I hadn't been standing in the hallway at exactly the right moment. I thought about it honestly. I don't know, I said. You would have been at the wedding, she said. You would have watched me sign the papers. Yes, and something would have happened. Eventually. Yes, I said, but not before Monday. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you don't sleep in anymore. I laughed, and she laughed, and we sat there in her kitchen in the August evening, the windows open, her cat asleep on the back of the couch, and I thought about my husband and what he would have said. I thought he would have said, of course she was there. Of course she was exactly where she needed to be. He was not a sentimental man, but he believed in that kind of thing. The idea that we show up for the people we love in ways we don't always plan and can't always explain. That some mornings you wake up at 6:15 for no reason at all, and you walk into a hallway and that turns out to be the most important thing you ever did. I believe it too. I always have. To anyone listening to this, I'm not telling you to go looking for trouble. I'm not saying trust no one and verify everything. That's not a life. But I am saying this. If something wakes you up in the middle of a quiet morning and something feels wrong and you can't explain it, listen to it. Stay still. Pay attention. Your instincts are not nothing. They are everything you've learned dressed up as a feeling. And if you love someone, really love them, sometimes the most important thing you will ever do for them happens in a hallway, in your housecoat at 6:15 in the morning, before anyone else is awake. Don't open that door, my housekeeper whispered, grabbing my wrist so hard I nearly dropped my handbag. Please, Vivian, not yet. You need to hear this first. I remember thinking she had lost her mind. It was the morning of my son's wedding, the kind of September morning we get in Nova Scotia when the summer hasn't quite given up. Warm enough that I'd chosen the cream linen blazer, cool enough that I was grateful for it. The maple out front had just started to turn, that first blush of orange at the tips. My son Elliot was getting married in 4 hours. I should have been crying happy tears into my coffee. I should have been calling my sister in Dartmouth to say, "Can you believe it? My boy is finally doing it." Instead, I was standing in my own front hallway with my housekeeper's hand around my wrist, being told not to open a door in my own house. Her name is Mabel. She has worked for me for 11 years, since just after my husband passed. She is 73 years old and does not panic. She does not grip things. She folds laundry like it owes her money, and she has never once in 11 years raised her voice at me. So when I felt her fingers digging into my arm that morning, something cold moved through my chest. "What is it?" I asked. She looked at the door to the sitting room, then back at me. Her eyes were wet. "Your daughter-in-law," she said. "She's on the phone." "Of course she's on the phone, Mabel. It's her wedding day." She doesn't know I can hear her. Mabel lowered her voice to almost nothing. "The window in the hall bathroom is open. I was changing the towels. She's in the garden. Vivian, she's not talking to a girlfriend." I looked at her. She said, Mabel stopped, swallowed. She said the transfer has to happen before the ceremony. She said if the marriage is registered, the estate becomes jointly held and it's harder to move. She said, another pause. She said once it's done, she'll figure out the rest. The rest. I stood there with my handbag strapped still over my shoulder, my good earrings already in, and I tried to make those words mean something innocent. I tried very hard. I'm a woman who spent 34 years as a family law notary in Halifax. I know what jointly held means. I know what transfer before the ceremony means. I know what the rest means. I had never liked Ingrid. I want to say that plainly because people will think I'm saying it now to justify what happened, and I'm not. I had never liked her. I'd told Elliot once, carefully, the way you do when you know you're one wrong word away from losing your son, that I found her difficult to read. He'd smiled the way young people smile when they think their parents are simply old. She's just private, Mum. Not everyone performs warmth. She was 31. He was 39. They had met 18 months before at a gallery fundraiser in downtown Halifax, one of those events where the wine is excellent and everyone is wearing something that cost more than it should. She worked in private wealth management. She had the kind of composure that looks like confidence, until you're in a room with it long enough, and then it starts to look like something else. My late husband Jeffrey had built a modest estate over 50 years. Nothing flashy. A property in Chester Basin, a rental building in Dartmouth, investments managed carefully through a firm he'd trusted since the 80s. When he died, everything came to me. When I die, it goes to Elliot. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. I had never changed it. I had no reason to. Mabel was still looking at me. I put my handbag down on the hall table, very slowly, the way you put things down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to know. "Show me where," I said. The hall bathroom window was cracked open maybe 3 inches. Enough. I could hear her clearly. Ingrid's voice, low and even, the way she always spoke, like every sentence had already been edited. She was standing just below in the garden, facing the birch trees, her back to the house. "The account is already set up," she was saying. "Raymond, I need you to be ready to receive it by noon, before we're at the registry." A pause. "No, he doesn't know about the Kelowna account. Nobody does." Another pause, longer. "I told you, he thinks it's a joint savings account we're opening for the house fund. He signed the forms 3 weeks ago." Her voice dipped even lower, but the morning was still, and I heard every word. "Once we're legally married, if anything goes sideways, I'm entitled to half the matrimonial property anyway. But this way, it's cleaner. This way, it's already done." I stepped back from the window. My son had signed forms 3 weeks ago. He had signed forms and not told me. Because she had told him it was for a house fund. Because he trusted her. Because he loved her, the way my boy has always loved, completely and without his eyes fully open. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. The tile was cold through my linen trousers. Jeffrey used to say that the problem with raising a generous child is that generosity doesn't come with a built-in skeptic. Elliot has always been that way. The boy who gave his lunch to the kid who forgot his. The man who stayed late for colleagues who didn't deserve it. Jeffrey said it with such tenderness when he said it. It wasn't a criticism. It was a worry, dressed up as an observation, the way parents do. I thought about Jeffrey sitting beside me on that bathtub edge. I thought about what he would have said. I thought about it for about 45 seconds, and then I stood up. "Mabel," I said, "I need you to do something for me." I called my solicitor at 8:30 in the morning, which I have never done in my life. Heather has been my solicitor for 22 years, and she answered on the 3rd ring because she is exactly the kind of person who answers on the 3rd ring. I told her what I had heard. I was precise. 34 years as a notary teaches you to be precise, even when your voice is shaking. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Vivian, do you know the name Raymond?" I didn't. "Is there any chance," she said, "that Ingrid Solvay is also known by another name, or has been?" I went very still. Why? Because I looked her up 6 months ago when Elliot first mentioned the engagement. I should have told you then. I found a civil court record in British Columbia. A breach of contract claim, dismissed, but the complainant listed a woman named Renee Davaux. The contact information matched an address in Kelowna. Kelowna. The same word I had just heard through a 3-inch gap in a bathroom window. "Heather," I said. "What do I do?" she told me. She was very clear. She said, "Do not confront her. Do not warn Elliot before you have documentation. Get to the wedding. Let me make calls." She would contact her associate in BC. She said there may be a financial crimes angle here depending on what the Kelowna account contains, and if so, she knew who to call. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, looking at the wedding program sitting on the counter. Elliot's name at the top, Ingrid's below it, in that elegant serif font she had chosen herself. The ceremony was at 1 o'clock at a small Anglican church in Chester. 40 guests. A reception at the Chester Golf Club after. I had baked the groom's cake myself. White chocolate with raspberry. It had taken me 2 days. Mabel drove me to the church. That was unusual. I normally drive myself, but my hands had not entirely stopped their low, quiet trembling, and we both knew it was better this way. She didn't speak much. She put Radio 2 on low, and when they played something orchestral, she turned it lower still, as if she understood I needed the quiet. I had not spoken to Elliot since the night before. He had texted me at 7 that morning. "Good morning, Mom. Big day. Love you." I had replied, "Love you too, sweetheart. See you at the altar." Which was true. Which I had meant. The church was a white wooden building at the end of a tree-lined road, the kind of church that has been there for 140 years and will be there for 140 more. The leaves were turning all along that road. It should have been the most beautiful morning. In some part of me that I had sectioned off and locked, it still was. Heather called me as Mabel pulled into the church lane. "I've spoken to my contact," she said. "The account in Kelowna is registered to a René DeVoe. Ingrid Solvay is a legal name change filed in 2019 in BC. Before that, she was René DeVoe." She paused. "Vivian, there's an existing civil judgment against René DeVoe in BC. A former partner. Fraud. She settled out of court in 2021, but the record exists. I've also found she was in a common law relationship in Kelowna until at least 2022. A man named Raymond Poole." "Raymond. He's her partner," I said. "It wasn't a question. It appears so. I've shared what I have with an associate at the Halifax office of the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. I can't promise anything moves quickly, Vivian, but you have documentation now. You have grounds." "The ceremony starts in 40 minutes, I said. A silence. Then you need to stop it. I want to tell you what it feels like to walk into your son's wedding knowing what I knew. I want to be honest about it because this is the part that I could not have imagined before I lived it. It doesn't feel righteous. Not in that moment. It feels like grief. Like standing at the edge of something beautiful that is already broken, and knowing that breaking it in front of everyone is still better than letting it stay beautiful and hollow. You think about his face. You think about the moment it changes. You think about every birthday cake and every school play and every time he called you from university homesick at 11 at night, and you think, this is still the thing I have to do. I found the minister in the small room off the entrance hall. He was a mild, careful man named Reverend Gower who had known our family for 30 years. I told him I needed 5 minutes. He looked at my face and gave me 10. Elliot was in the vestry with his best man, a university friend named Stuart. I knocked and opened the door before anyone answered. My son looked up and his face did the thing it has done since he was 4 years old. Opened completely, just for a moment. The way it does when he sees me. "Mum, you're early, the guests aren't even. I need to speak to you alone," I said. "Right now, please." Stuart, to his credit, left without being asked twice. I closed the door. I told my son everything. I told him quickly because we had no time, and I told him completely because he deserved that, and I watched his face move through more expressions than I have words for. Confusion first, then a frown, then something that looked almost like amusement, the instinct to explain it away, to find the version that makes it fine. Then I told him about the Kelowna account, and about Raymond Poole, and about René Duval. The frown went away. Everything went away. His face was very still. "She changed her name," I said quietly. "She has a history of this, Elliot. Heather found the civil record. The same man she's been directing the money to, Raymond," he said. His voice was flat. You know him? She told me he was her financial advisor. We were both quiet for a moment. I signed forms, he said. He pressed his hand flat against the vestry wall. 3 weeks ago, she brought forms home and told me it was for a joint savings account. I signed them. I didn't even... He stopped. I didn't read them. He looked at me then, and I saw it. Not anger, not yet. Just a young man standing in the place where what he thought was real used to be. It is the worst thing I have ever seen on my son's face. And I have seen him lose his father. We're going to be okay, I said. We're going to be okay. Reverend Gower delayed the start of the ceremony by 15 minutes. He was remarkably calm about it. He told the guests there was a small delay and offered the organist the chance to play a second piece, which she did. A Bach prelude that echoed in the rafters of that old wooden church while Elliot sat in the vestry and held the documentation Heather had sent to his phone and read every word. Ingrid arrived at the church at 1:11. She was in the bridal room with 2 friends who had driven up from Truro. I don't know what she was thinking in those minutes. I don't know if she suspected anything. Her composure may have been genuine, or it may have been simply that she had done this kind of thing before and knew how to stay steady. What I know is that at 1:17, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit contacted Heather, who contacted me, to say that a flag had been triggered on the Kelowna account. The account had been accessed that morning. $38,000 moved. And the movement matched a pattern that matched previous flagged activity under the name Renee DeVoe. They needed to speak with her. They were already in Chester. 2 officers were waiting outside when Ingrid walked out of the church's side entrance. I don't know what she thought she was walking toward. The car, maybe. The escape route she'd already planned, the way people like her always plan. Stuart told me afterward that she didn't say a word when they stopped her. She just looked at the officers for a long moment, and then she looked down at her dress. A very beautiful dress, ivory silk, shoes that matched. And she let out one slow breath. That was all. Elliot did not watch. I had asked him not to, and he'd listened. He was sitting on the church steps with Mabel, who had produced tea from somewhere. She always produces tea from somewhere, and they were sitting together in the September sun, and he was not speaking, and she was not asking him to. I stood at the side of the church, and I watched a woman in a wedding dress be guided toward an RCMP vehicle, and I thought about Jeffrey, and I thought about how much I missed having someone to call. Then I walked over to the church steps and sat down on the other side of my son and put my hand over his, and we stayed like that for a long time. The reception did not happen, or rather, it happened, but not in the way anyone expected. 40 people who had driven from across Nova Scotia and as far as New Brunswick stood around the Chester Golf Club with glasses of sparkling water and plates of canapes and tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Some of them were kind. Some of them were merely curious. Elliot's aunt, my sister Noreen, who had driven 3 hours from Cape Breton, sat with us in a private room the club manager had quietly unlocked, and she did not try to fill the silence. Noreen has always known when silence is the right thing to offer. The cake was served anyway. I want to mention that because it matters to me. Someone had the good sense to bring it out, and people ate it, and 2 of Elliot's cousins told him it was the best white chocolate cake they'd ever had. Mabel accepted the credit on my behalf, and I was glad for it. In the weeks after, Heather worked with RCMP investigators to untangle what Ingrid de Renee had done. The forms Elliot had signed were for a discretionary authority agreement, not a savings account. It would have given Raymond Poole control over a portion of Elliot's investment holdings, routed through the Kelowna account, which had been established under a numbered company Renee had controlled since 2020. The $38,000 move that morning was the first draw. There was evidence she had planned to move significantly more after the marriage was registered, using the jointly held status as cover. The BC civil judgment was used to establish pattern. The RCMP laid charges in November. The case is still before the courts, and I won't say more than that because Heather has advised me not to. What I will say is this. Elliot bought a small house in the Annapolis Valley in the spring. He has a dog now, a ridiculous, enormous Bernese mountain dog named Corporal, who sheds on everything and believes the couch is his by right. I drove out to visit in June, and we sat on his porch in the evening with the valley going gold around us and Corporal's enormous head on my knee, and Elliot said, "I should have listened to you." I told him that wasn't the point. He looked at me sideways. What was the point then? I thought about Mabel's hand around my wrist. I thought about a bathroom window open 3 inches on a September morning. I thought about Jeffrey's words, the ones he said with so much tenderness. The problem with raising a generous child. The point, I said, is that you are your father's son, and that's never going to stop being true, no matter who tries to use it against you. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached over and put his hand on mine, the same way I had put my hand on his on those church steps. Corporal snored. The valley went quieter. The light stayed gold a little longer than it needed to. That was enough. That has always been enough. I thought a lot about what I would have done if that bathroom window had been closed. It's not a comfortable thought. It means the whole thing. Elliot's savings, the account in Kelowna, all of it would have moved forward without a single person knowing. The ceremony would have happened. The paperwork would have been filed. And by the time anything felt wrong, it would have already been done. What I keep coming back to isn't the legal outcome or even catching Ingrid in the end. What I keep coming back to is Mabel. 11 years of quiet, steady, show up every morning and do the work loyalty. She didn't have to say anything. She could have told herself it wasn't her place. She could have convinced herself she'd misheard. Instead, she stood in that hallway and she held my wrist and she told me the truth, even though the truth was going to blow the day apart. That kind of courage doesn't announce itself. It just acts. I think about the choices Ingrid made too, not to understand her, but because the pattern of it says something worth sitting with. Every step she took, the name change, the discretionary forms, the account registered under a numbered company, the man in Kelowna ready to receive the transfer, every single one of those steps required a decision. Nobody stumbles into that kind of scheme. It is built piece by piece over months with intention, and at each decision point she chose again. Chose deception over honesty. Chose to use someone's generosity as a door left open rather than a gift freely given. Elliot is a generous man. He has always been a generous man. That is not a flaw. I need to say that plainly because I spent several weeks after the wedding wondering if I had somehow failed him by not making him harder. I hadn't. Generosity is not the problem. The willingness to stop asking questions once you've decided to trust someone, that's the place where care needs to live. Not suspicion, not cynicism, just the quiet habit of staying a little awake even when you love someone, especially when you love someone. There is a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with credentials or cleverness. It's the kind that notices when something feels slightly off and doesn't immediately talk itself out of the feeling. I had that feeling about Ingrid from the beginning, and I set it aside too many times because I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't let her son grow up. I understand now that those are two different things. You can trust your child completely and still trust your own read of a room. What happened that September morning was not a victory. I want to be honest about that. There's nothing triumphant about watching a woman in a wedding dress be guided toward an RCMP vehicle while your son sits on church steps and tries to understand what his last 18 months actually were. There is nothing good in that image. There is only the quieter thing underneath it. The fact that it stopped. That it didn't go further. That Elliot still has what his father spent 50 years building, and more importantly, that he has the rest of his life ahead of him with his eyes a little more open than before. He bought the house in the valley in the spring. He has the ridiculous dog. He calls me on Sundays. That is what I wanted for him. Not the lesson. Nobody wants the lesson, but the life on the other side of it. I am 63 years old, and I am still learning that the people who stay, the ones who show up quietly, day after day, and tell you the truth when it costs them something, those are the ones worth holding on to. Everything else, the composure, the impressive credentials, the careful performances. Those things require much closer watching. Mabel retired in February. I threw her a proper party, the kind she would have thrown me. She cried, which I had never once seen her do, and I cried, which surprised neither of us. She left me a plant. It's still alive, which she would say is the whole point.